Rome, 904 AD. A city teetering on the edge of chaos, ruled not by virtue but by ambition. Noble families pull strings behind the veils of sacred authority. The papacy, once the spiritual heartbeat of Christendom, has become a prize for the ruthless, a throne for those who dare to combine violence, cunning, and vice. Into this world strides Sergius III, a man whose ambition is matched only by his capacity for cruelty. He would murder rivals, indulge in every imaginable vice, and claim as his lover the 15-year-old daughter of his own cousin. The consequences of his actions would echo for centuries. That young mistress, Marozia, would bear a son who himself would become pope, entwining scandal with the lineage of the church. Historians would later label this era the Pornocracy, a dark reign where vice and politics fused in ways the world had never seen. Stay with us until the end, and you'll uncover the shocking life of Pope Sergius III, the origins of the Pornocracy, and a story that reveals just how dangerously human desire can shape history. To understand Sergius III, we need to understand Rome at the turn of the 10th century. This was the Saeculum Obscurum, the dark age of the papacy. The spiritual authority of the pope was nominal. Real power was in the hands of Rome's elite noble families, chief among them the Theophylacti, who controlled not just politics, but the very heartbeat of the city. Rome was a city of intrigue. Every street hid alliances, every villa harbored spies, and every noble family guarded secrets capable of toppling rivals. The church, ideally a moral compass, had become a pawn in this game of blood and ambition. Theophylactus and his wife Theodora ruled with an iron fist. They dictated who could ascend to the papal throne and who would be eliminated. Into this maelstrom stepped Sergius, a man of cunning, cruelty, and ambition. He was not content to merely serve the family that dominated Rome. He wanted it all. How did a single nobleman rise from the shadow of the Theophylacti to sit on the throne of the papacy itself? Sergius III's path to power was violent and calculated. In 904, he invaded Rome with a small but disciplined army, cutting a swath through anyone who dared oppose him. Nobles who resisted were slaughtered. The streets ran red with the blood of his enemies. Once he reached the Lateran Palace, two pretenders to the papal seat emerged, Antipope Christopher and Leo Futh. These men, though recognized by some factions, were no match for Sergius's ruthlessness. He had them arrested and executed, leaving the papacy entirely under his control. What followed was an astonishing transformation. Sergius, formerly a nobleman in the shadows of power, now held absolute authority over the Church of Rome. Yet, this was not a pontificate defined by prayer or devotion, but by indulgence and domination. He embraced the trappings of wealth and power with unrestrained enthusiasm. Gold, silk, and the grandeur of the Lateran Palace became symbols of his victory and his pleasure. Sergius had achieved something almost unthinkable. He seized the ultimate seat of spiritual power through sheer force. But power, as history would reveal, came with temptations he would pursue without restraint. And among all the indulgences Rome whispered about, one scandal would dwarf them all. Under Sergius III, the Lateran Palace became a theater of vice. Prostitutes were said to roam the halls, cardinals whispered of his indulgence in every vice imaginable, and Rome watched in a mixture of fear and fascination. He was described as the slave of every vice. A pope, supposed to be a moral and spiritual leader, was living openly in debauchery. Wine, women, and pleasure became the currency of his pontificate. Even the most sacred offices were corrupted, as the spiritual authority of the church became inseparable from the personal indulgences of its head. And yet, there was one indulgence that would shock the city more than anything: a relationship with a girl barely a teenager, a member of the same family whose influence had made him pope. Who was this girl, and how did her story intertwine with the power of the papacy? Her name was Marozia, daughter of Theophylacti's scion, and just 15 years old. To Sergius, she became more than a political pawn. She became his mistress. The age difference was staggering. He was in his late 40s, and yet he took her as his lover. Their union produced a son, John V, who would later become pope himself. Imagine the implications. a pope fathering a future pope through an affair with a teenage girl. The papacy, a spiritual institution meant to guide Christendom, had become entangled with personal lust, ambition, and corruption. Contemporaries whispered, cardinals gossiped, Rome recoiled at the audacity. But the story does not end here. This union would cement the notion of the Pornocracy, a reign defined by moral decay at the very heart of the Church. The affair with Marozia was not just scandal. It was a dynastic maneuver that would leave a mark on the papacy itself. How did Rome and history react to such audacity? If this story fascinates and horrifies you, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the next story from history's darkest corners. Sergius' reign inaugurated what historians would later call the Pornocracy, a term that reflected both scandal and political decay. Rome had never seen a pontificate like this. A pope who wielded spiritual authority while indulging openly in lust, manipulation, and violence. 19th century Protestant historians were especially scathing, portraying Sergius as the embodiment of corruption in the church. Yet the story is more complex. Sergius was a product of his era, a city where noble families dictated papal authority, where political and sexual power were intertwined, and where morality was subordinate to ambition. His story challenges us to consider the frailty of institutions when power is left unchecked, and how personal vice can ripple through history. But what of his son, John X? How did the sins of the father influence the church decades later? John VII, the son born of this scandal, would rise to the papacy, creating a tangled lineage that blurred the lines between moral authority and family ambition. Sergius III's actions forced the church to confront uncomfortable truths about power, morality, and human desire. The tale of Sergius III is not merely one of sex and scandal. It's a cautionary story about ambition, corruption, and the perils of unchecked authority. It reveals how even the most sacred institutions can become mirrors of human weakness when personal desire outweighs spiritual duty. We are left with questions that resonate even today. How much corruption can a spiritual institution endure? Can power ever coexist with virtue? And how often do the actions of one individual reshape the course of history? Pope Sergius III died in 911, but his shadow lingered for centuries. He left a city, a church, and a lineage forever altered by ambition, lust, and scandal. History remembers him not for holiness, but for audacity, a pope who dared to fuse spiritual authority with personal desire. If this story left you stunned, subscribe and turn on notifications for more untold chapters from history, where power, ambition, and scandal collide in ways stranger than fiction. Because sometimes the lessons we learn come from the darkest corners of our past.